Masechet Baba Batra Daf Nun He Amar Rabba Hane Telat Mile Ishtaeli Okvan Bar Nehemia Resh Galuta Misheme de Shmuel. Rabba reports that the following three halachot were said to him by Ukvan, the son of Nehemiah, who was the Resh Galuta. That's the political head of the community, of the Jewish community in Bavel. He is responsible for being the liaison between the Persian government and the Jewish community, of collecting taxes, of appointing people to be judges. And so he's a very, very important and powerful person. And he's also a Talmid Chacham. There were lots of Resh Galutas. Some were greater in their knowledge, some less so. But in any case, they were part of the colleagues of the rabbis. And so this particular Resh Galuta, Ukvan, reported the following halachot in the name of Shemuel. And Rabbah is telling us what they are. Number one, Dina de Malchuta Dina. Shemuel taught, and we've seen this a number of times, it appears lots of times, that Shemuel says that the law of the land is considered the halachic law as well. If the government, or if you're under the Persian government, they have a certain law, or a civil law, monetary law, then that will affect the halacha as well. And there are many applications to that. And furthermore, sharecropping under the Persians is for 40 years. Many interpretations of this, you could look at them here, but the simplest one is that if you become a sharecropper without designating for how long this agreement will be, then the standard is for 40 years. It's like a long-term lease. Like in New York, you have a 99-year lease. And so basically the owner or the government will say, okay, you can use this land. You're the sharecropper, and you keep this much. You have to give that much to the owner or to the government, and the standard amount is 40 years. Vehane zaharure tezaben ad aletaska zabin hu zebine. This is the one that we're going to discuss further. If you have zaharure, a certain tax official, it's not clear. There's a bunch of words that we're going to see that are either Aramaic or maybe Persian words. This is a tax collector who sells land for the land tax. That sale is valid. Here's how it works. Let's say I own land and I have to pay my land tax to the Persian government every year. If I don't pay, then the Persian government has a law that says that they can confiscate that land and give it to someone else who will pay the land tax. You can kind of think of it as the Persian government owns everybody's land, and you can lease it out per year for the amount of the land tax. And as long as you pay your tax on time, then you keep ownership and you can keep using that land from year to year. But if you don't, then you lose your right to the land, and then the government will say, okay, listen, anybody else want to pay? And they'll sell it to that person, who will pay the tax. So you have these zaharure, who are the tax collectors. They come around and they say, hey, you didn't pay the tax. And if you don't pay it, then they will sell your land to someone else. Now that sale, the Shemuel teaches, is valid. I mean, this goes along with Dina de Malchuta Dina. That's the law of the land. So even if the land belonged to a Jew before, and some tax collector comes and confiscates it because he didn't pay his tax, and sells it to another Jew, the second Jew who bought it is the rightful owner. Even though he did not pay the first Jew was not paid at all, nevertheless, this is the law of the land. Really, the government owns everything, and as long as that buyer pays the tax to the government sees him as the official owner, and the halakha will recognize that Persian law as well. Now, this last halakha only applies to land tax, but not to head tax. What is the reason? Because a head tax is placed on a man's head, not on his land. In other words, if I don't pay my land tax, then the government says, look, we have a lien on your land. They have a lien on everyone's land, and they can take away anyone's land, and they have a right to do so, and therefore their sale of someone's land is a valid sale. However, when it comes to a head tax, so this opinion, here it's anonymous, we're going to see this is Amemar's opinion. A head tax, this is on my personal head, my personal body. If I don't pay my head tax, every single person, every head has to pay a certain amount, $1,000 per year, and so then they can punish me, they can put me in jail, but they don't have a lien on my property for paying the head tax. And therefore, if a head tax collector comes and confiscates my property and sells it to someone, then that sale is not valid. That's the distinction here between land tax and a head tax. That's Amemar's position. However, there's a disagreement. Rav Huna bered Rav Yehoshua amar, afilu sa'are dechada mishta'bedeh lecharga. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, there's going to be another Rav Huna that's going to come up in a second. So remember it's this one. He says that everything, even barley in a pitcher, right? Just a little bit of barley that's in a pitcher, not even like a lot in the storehouse, not talking about land and property and gold, and everything that a person owns is mortgaged for his head tax. So according to Rav Huna, basically the government owns everything, not only your land for the land tax, but they own everything that you have, and have a lien on it for the payment of the head tax. And therefore, if I don't pay my head tax and the government comes and seizes land or seizes my jewelry or seizes barley that's in the pitcher and they sell it, that sale is valid according to Rav Huna, because he makes no distinction between a land tax and a head tax. Happens to be that the land tax is because I own land and head tax is because I have a head. But it doesn't matter. The government has a lien on all my property in order to pay the head tax, just like they have a lien on the property, on the land, to pay the land tax. And therefore all sales are valid if the tax collector confiscates something and sells it. Amar Rav Asher, Amar li Huna bar Natan. So Rav Asher is reporting the name of Huna bar Natan, different from Rav Huna. Kasher ba Amemar. And he said that the Amora named Amemar had a difficulty with Rav Huna's opinion. Im ken bitalta Yerushat beno ha-bechor tahavale ra'ui ven ha-bechor notel bera'ui kebemuchzak. His difficulty is if you follow the law of Rav Huna, that everything that a person owns has a lien on, is mortgaged to the government. In that case, there will never be a law that the firstborn gets double, because that will be only potential wealth and not actual wealth. Here's the halacha regarding a bechor. When a father dies and he has a few sons, the firstborn gets double, but the firstborn only gets double of actual wealth, land and money, cash, that property, things that the father currently owns. Then the firstborn gets double and everybody else gets a single amount. However, if it's potential money, let's say someone owes the father money, there's some receivables, but the father doesn't yet have it, in that case, the oldest brother does not get double. When that person will pay, then they all split it equally. He only gets double of everything that the father totally owns. So, when it comes to a property that has a mortgage on it, that has a lien on it, that is also potential because the father doesn't fully own it. And therefore, here's the problem. If you're going to say, Rav Huna, that all of a person's property, land and barley and everything, it has a lien on it to the government in order to pay the head tax, well then everything that a person owns is really only ra'ui, is only potentially owned, because the government could take away everything at any time. And therefore, a firstborn will never get double. Okay, important challenge. Amri le'i hachi afilu taskana me. And Huna bar Natan answered Amemar, defending Rav Huna. So actually, Huna bar Natan is on the same side as Rav Huna, and he says as follows: if that's what you're worried about, that a firstborn will never get the double portion, well then, even if you follow your own opinion, Amemar, that land is liened to a land tax, then even taska, even for the land tax, you would have a lien on someone's land. land, and a firstborn will never get a double portion in land, because all land, you have to pay tax on all land, so all land is a lien to the government and not fully owned by the father, and so you have the same problem, Amemad. So Amemad, why are you asking this according to, as a challenge to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, when this would be a question even on the agreed upon halakha? Everyone agrees regarding land tax. That was the opinion of Shemuel, right? That says if you sell land, if the tax official confiscates and sells land because the person didn't pay the land tax, then that's legitimate. So that means that all land is only potentially owned, and therefore the firstborn never will get a double portion. So your question, Mamemad, is a question on Shemuel's opinion as well. Ela ma'it lach lememad tiahib taska umit hachaname tehib karga umit. So rather, what do you have to say in order to answer the question for Shemuel? Right? You, Amemad, you agree with Shemuel regarding the land tax. So you have to say we're talking about a case where someone already paid the land tax and then he died. The land tax was due on April 15th. He paid it and then he died on April 16th. And so that's why there's no lien on his land anymore, because he successfully paid the land tax, at least for that year. So there's no more lien. It's not ra'ui, it's not potential, it's actual wealth, and the firstborn will get double of the land. So even you, Amemad, are going to have to agree, because everyone's going to follow Shemuel's law that the firstborn would get double only in the case where he paid the land tax and then died. So therefore, I can say the same thing on behalf of Rav Huna. Hachaname tehib karga umit. Here too, we're talking about a father who paid the head tax, and then he died after he paid the head tax. So once he paid the head tax, then all of the rest of his property and wealth is no longer a lien to pay the head tax. So he dies, and then that's actual wealth, not just potential, and the firstborn can get his double portion, and so we resolve that problem. Amar Rav Asher, Amar li Huna bar Natan. Rav Asher already reported one thing in the name of the sage. So now another related law. She'iltinu l'safre de Rabba, ve'amiru li hilcheta ke Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. So Rav Asher says that Huna bar Natan told him that he spoke to the scribes of Rava. Rava had a bet din, and he had scribes that would work in the bet din. People would come, and they needed different documents written up. So, and the scribes said that the halacha follows Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, that everything that a person owns is lien to pay this head tax. And therefore, if someone doesn't pay the head tax and the government confiscates anything that a person has, then that sale will be valid. That's what the scribes of Rava said. Now, these scribes, they may be learned, but they're not necessarily legal authorities themselves. And therefore, the Gemara corrects this report and says, Velohi hatam le'okume milete hu de'amar. But this is not true what these scribes reported. Halacha is not like Rav Huna. They said that only to buttress their own statements and their own actions. The scribes, you see, had been writing documents like this. There were people that had certain sales of items that were confiscated by the government and then sold to someone else because the original owner didn't pay the head tax. And these scribes were writing sale documents for this. And they didn't want all of their sale documents to now be shown to be false, because if you don't follow Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua, then those sales are not valid. The government only has a lien on land for land tax, but not for head tax. The head tax is only the person, the body himself. And so if you don't follow Rav Huna, then their documents that they wrote up would be invalid, and then they would lose credibility as being proper scribes. Oh, that scribe, half the things he writes are not valid. He's going to lose business. So that's why they said that halacha is like Rav Huna. However, the halacha is not actually like Rav Huna, but rather like the literal reading of Shemuel, and as Amenmar's challenge was, that the lien applies only to the land tax, and the government that sells land for someone not paying the land tax is a valid sale. But if someone doesn't pay the head tax, then that's only his head is liened to the government, but not his property. Amar Rav Asher, pardacht misaya mata, v'hanemile da'asilte mata, aval andiski tziyata dishmayahi. Some more probably Persian words. Some of them are hard to figure out where they come from. Anyway, Rav Asher says that an idle person has to help out in the town. If you have a guy, and there's a homeless guy, a person who has an unemployed guy in the town, and he has to help out with the taxes. The idea is that the government comes and says, we're collecting head tax. How many people live in this town? 1,000. Everybody has to give $1,000. That's 1,000 times 1,000. The city has to pay $1 million. And the government doesn't always go to each person themselves, right? They ask the city official to come up with the $1 million for the entire city. And so this guy who has no job, but he lives in the city, well, they still have to pay on his behalf. So therefore, he is responsible to help out. However, there's a limitation on this. That's only asilte mata. That's only if the town helped out that guy and saved him, either by coming up with more money and they covered his expense, then certainly he owes that money. And even if the officials of the town told the government, listen, I know you counted 1,000 people, but this guy, he has no job, he can't make money, right? He's just a poor guy, so leave him out. And the government officials, okay, fine, you don't have to pay $1,000 for him, right? And so if it's the city residents and officials who helped out this guy and intervened on his behalf, then he still has to help out. However, if it's andiski, if the tax collector himself just skipped over the guy, right? You're going from house to house. This guy, maybe he has no house, or he saw him on a bench doing nothing. He says, okay, forget about that guy. He doesn't have $1 to his pocket. I'm not going to bother trying to get money from him. If it's the tax collector himself who skips over the guy, then we call that siyata dishmaya. That's heavenly assistant helped him, and therefore he does not have to pay anything to the city, because he got scot-free. He got lucky. Great. Hashem helped him out. But if it's the city people that helped him and got involved on his behalf, then he is responsible to pay into the tax collection fund. אמר רב אסה, אמר רבי יוחנן, המסר והחסב מפסיקים בנכסי הגר, אבל לעניין פאה וטומאה לה. So Rav Aseh says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to see that another student of Rabbi Yochanan said the opposite of this, but let's learn the first one first. He says that a boundary marker and a sea squill. A boundary marker would be like a set of stones or a hedge, a raised up section of the land that separates between two parts of the land. Generally, if it's two different neighbors, so that would show this is my land and that's your land. Would be a clear separation between the two. In this case, we're talking about the property that was once owned by a convert who died without any heirs. And so whoever comes and takes the property first, who does an act of acquisition, will get it. We're talking about that kind of case. So now he has two sections. They're separated by either a boundary marker or by a chatzav. That's a sea squill plant. It's a plant that has a big bulb that looks like this, and it shoots up a shoot like this at the end of the summer. And these were used also as boundary markers between fields, because you can see this very easily. It goes nice and straight up and regularly produces those shoots. So if you have such a case, and then someone comes and, as we said before, let's say they do an act of acquisition in one of the fields, then they only gain ownership of that field and not of the one next to it, because there is a boundary marker. If there was no boundary marker between them, and he got one of them, he could say, I want the whole thing. So that's fine. He digs a furrow in one part of it, then he'll get the whole thing. But if there are these boundary markers, even though these are relatively weak boundary markers, nevertheless, it's sufficient to separate it as that's one field, you only acquired that one and not the other. Okay, this part everybody agrees with. The question is, what about for other laws, for pe'ah and tum'ah? So according to Rav Aseh, Rabbi Yochanan says these are not boundary markers. The law of pe'ah is you have to leave a corner of the field for every field that you own. And that means if you have two fields that are separated by a major separation, like a river, we're about to say, then you have to leave, even if you're growing the same thing. You're growing wheat here, you have to leave a corner of wheat on this field and another corner of wheat on the other field, because they are separated. However, However, for these separations, since they're weak separations, are not considered separations. So, if you're growing wheat on both of these fields with just some sea squills in between, then this is not considered separation. You can leave a corner on one of the fields, and that will serve as pe'ah for both fields. That's the law of pe'ah. For tum'ah, also, it does not cannot be used as a separation. We'll see the law of tum'ah in a minute. However, ki ata Ravin amar b'Yochanan afilu lepe'ah v'tum'ah. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he reported also in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that these, a boundary marker and a sea squill, are considered separations between the two parts of the field, not only for ownership. If you take one, then you don't get the other, but also for pe'ah and tum'ah. So for pe'ah, that means that you have to leave, because it is a boundary marker, that means if you leave a pe'ah on one side of the field, and then there's the sea squills in between, you have to leave another corner on the other part of the field. Okay, that's the machloket. Now we're going to explain. Pe'ah maihi. So what is the case of pe'ah? Ditnan. We have a Mishnah in Masechet pe'ah. Ve'eluhen mafsikin lepe'ah nachal v'shilulit. The following things are considered separations for the law of pe'ah, a stream and a canal. So if I have a big field and there's a stream or canal running through it, then that's considered a separation, and I have to leave a corner of both sides of the field. A public road and a private road. These are defined by how big they are. A public road is 16 amot wide or more, and a private road is 4 amot wide or more. Ushvil harabim, ushvil hayachid, or public trail, or a private trail. Hakavua ben bimot hagchama ben bimot hageshamim. So it's only a trail, not a nice road, but it's something that is used regularly, both in the summer and in the rainy season. You see, in the rainy season, people aren't going to walk through other people's fields because you'll step, there's things growing and you'll step on them. In the summer season, there's nothing on the field, so then people will are more lax and they'll just walk through the field. So just walking through the field in the summer season doesn't make it a path, because there the owner doesn't care if people are walking through. It's only considered an official path if people walk through it also in the rainy season when there are things growing. So then this is established as a path. Everybody knows for years, everybody walks in this particular spot through this other person's field. Then for all these things, these are considered official separations between the two parts of the field, and therefore the owner has to leave a corner of this field and a corner of the other side of the field. This Mishnah everybody agrees upon. The question is, what about these sea squills and these rocks that you use as a boundary marker? Are those also considered separations? So that was the machloket between the two versions of Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rav Aseh, these are not considered separations, and so you only have to leave one pe'ah. According to Ravin, they are considered separations, so you have to leave a corner on both sides. Tum'ah maihi. And what is the case regarding tum'ah that they were discussing, whether it's considered one field or two fields? Ditnan, Mishnah Masechet Taharot. הנכנס לבקעה בימות הגשמים וטומאה בשדה פלונית ואמר הלכתי למקום הלז ואיני יודע אם נכנסתי לאותו מקום ואם לאו. רבי אליעזר מתאר וחכמים מטמאים. Someone goes into a certain valley in the rainy season. It has to be in the rainy season because people generally don't walk in these such areas in the rainy season where things are growing. So because of that, it's considered reshut hayachid. There's a difference when it comes to safek tum'ah. If someone was in a certain area and they're not sure if there was tum'ah there or not, or if they touched the tum'ah or not. So there's a difference. If it's in Reshut HaYachid, then we are machmir. When it's in Reshut HaRabim, it's mekel. That's a general law. We learn it from Sotah. It also makes sense that if you're in a public place, who knows, there always might be something that someone put somewhere, and so you wouldn't be able to live. So you have to be more lenient on a private domain. There, you can go and check and make sure that you don't put tum'ah things around without knowing. Okay, so this is an area that's now considered Reshut HaYachid, and therefore, if someone has a safek, whether they encountered some tum'ah there, they're going to have to be machmir and be considered tameh. Okay, so there is some tum'ah in a certain field that's in that valley. And the person says, listen, I walked around that area. I walked in that valley, but I'm not sure if I entered that particular field or not. I just I know I walked nearby, but I don't know if I came into that field or not. So is he considered tameh or tahor? Rabbi Eliezer says tahor. Hachamim say he is tameh. Now we're going to focus on Rabbi Eliezer. Why does he say tahor? Shahiyah Rabbi Eliezer omer sefek bi'ah tahor, sefek maga tumah tameh. He said that when it comes to these sefekot, and we're talking about a shutei yachid, if there's a sefek whether you even entered the area or not, then you can be lenient, even if it's a shutei yachid, and be tahor. If it's a safek, whether you definitely went there, you're just not sure if you touched it or not, then you have to assume that you did touch it and you are tameh. So therefore, in a case where there's just like one big field there in the valley, and you definitely entered the field, then there's only one safek. The question is, did you touch the tum'ah that was in that field or not? We have to be machmir. However, if there are two fields next to each other, and you're not sure which field you went into, and one of them has tum'ah in it, and one of them doesn't have tum'ah, in that case, that's called safek bi'ah. I'm not even sure if I entered the field that has the tum'ah, and even if I did enter it, maybe I touched it and maybe I didn't, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer says that one can be mekel and one is tahor. That's the case that Rabbi Yochanan, the two versions of Rabbi Yochanan, would be talking about. Here you have two fields that are separated by these sea squills. Do you consider them as one field or two fields in regard to this? Let's say a person says, I went around that valley and I entered into one of the fields, but I'm not sure if it was this one, if it was the one that was tameh or not, and if I touched it or not, even if I was in that field. So if we consider the whole thing to be all one field, we don't consider it to be a boundary marker, well then he definitely went into the field, and then he doesn't have safek bi'ah, he only has safek maga, and he'd be tameh. However, if we consider the sea squills to be a boundary marker, well then, these are two separate fields here. Then he can say, I'm not even sure if I entered the field that had the tum'ah in it. I entered only one of the fields, but maybe it was the other one, and so therefore that would be sefek bi'ah, and so that would be an application of the machloket about what Rabbi Yochanan said in the area of tum'ah. Okay, good. And there's one last thing that will go into the next daf, aval Shabbat law, regarding the laws of Shabbat. There is for sure everyone agrees that they are not considered boundary markers, and we'll discuss the law of Shabbat on the next daf. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.